Everyone in this room has two immune systems. We have an innate immune system and an acquired immune system. The innate immune system is your first responder, the first one on the scene. This is your macrophage, your white antibodies. And they're the first ones on the scene, but the cancer cells are very clever because they have a mechanism to inactivate the macrophages in your body. It's an enzyme called nagalase that's just exuded from the cancer cell, and it stops the macrophages in their tracks. So what this researcher found, Dr. Yamamoto, is very clever. He found that by using a diabetic gauge needle and giving once weekly injections, because the substance GCMAF has a half-life of about 6.5 days, that it acted like reinforcements to the army, and it enabled your macrophages to overwhelm the cancer cells and destroy them. So that's what he's been doing, and he's been doing it quite successfully. But in contrast to that, we have a conventional system in place here that does not really help, and in fact actually kills people. Let me see. Oops, look at that. Boy, you're getting, now we're all done. Let's see. You can go home. That was pretty funny. Let's see if I can do this. Hey, are you doing it or am I? Go back. Okay. Hey, you're going the wrong way. The other way. Okay. We'll start over. No. The next one. And the next one. Yeah, there we go. So what we have is the conventional approach. And if you look at the records and the statistics over the years, and this isn't just last year, this is for many years, you'll see that properly licensed doctors, properly FDA-approved drugs, even properly inspected foods kill people and far in excess of dietary supplements. So you have some 800,000 deaths a year in the U.S., minimum, from hospitals, drugs, and doctors. And then you have about actually 100,000 on plus drugs. It really runs, or deaths, it really runs about 127,000, 130,000 deaths a year in the United States alone, and you take about 10% of that number for Canada and apply it, and it's valid, from properly approved drugs. And about 5,000 deaths a year from food. So what do you have? Let's see if I can lightly do this. So what we have is, and here are some harder figures for you, the number one cause of death in the U.S., if you look at all the figures, is really, and this is close to the 800,000 figure that you saw earlier, is the iatrogenic deaths, that is from doctors, from hospitals and the like. Number two cause you get is heart disease, but even that's preventable if you had the right nutritional preventive approach to heart disease, and that's been proven. The number three cause is cancer, and I already showed you one cure for cancer, and there are actually several, if not half a dozen cures for cancer that exist out there now, but are not allowed in the United States. It's got to be either cut, poison, or burn. And then the total number of deaths by the statistics that are offered here are about 2 million deaths. But I put it conservatively at 1 million in some of the papers I've written and in the earlier document. But this, I don't expect you to actually read this, but I expect you to appreciate the form of the document. This is a chart that shows the risk of dying relative to being killed on a Boeing 747 flight. And if you took the figure of 1, which is about right here, I think it's there. Usually I have the computer in front of me and I can actually read it. But here is the risk of dying on a Boeing 747 flight. Up here is the risk of dying from a properly approved drug that's been given to you. not a defective drug, but one that's been properly approved. This is from being in a hospital. And you go down. Now I want to show you the figures at the very bottom. This is your risk of dying from being hit by a meteorite. That's your least risk right there. And then the number 3 one is your risk of dying from being stung by a bee, being hit by a lightning bolt, or falling off a horse. That's number 3. So guess what number 2 is? That's your risk of dying from taking a dietary supplement, from taking a vitamin or a mineral. So all this money and all these controls and all these regulations that they're wanting to heap on the supplement industry, and by the way, I don't work for the supplement industry, certainly not directly. I'm here on behalf of the National Health Federation, is all devoted to trying to reduce this figure here to a very, very low number. But of course, we all know what it's really about. It's about protecting the drug profits and the hospital monopolies and the doctor monopolies all up here that are killing 1 to 2 million people a year. So the reason this is important is you need to keep this in mind as I go through my talk, and it'll help you put in context why we are fighting this battle, why we are fighting these rules and regulations. It's not that these things are dangerous, and I'm talking about the supplements or the natural alternatives, because they aren't. They're very safe. In the last year for which they had hard statistics, 2008, there were no deaths from vitamins or mineral supplements. So it's something that is very, very safe. They're actually far safer than the drugs, than the hospitals, than going to a doctor, than even eating food that's on your table. During 23 years, these are some other statistics, there were maybe 10 deaths from supplements. And the wildest claim is 75 deaths, and that's from the government itself. They are safer than drugs, doctors, hospitals, food, horse riding, bee stings, even lightning. And what you find is the reason that they're suppressed or trying to be suppressed is that they actually work. Here I already pointed out one, which is the GCMAF for cancer, and it actually works for AIDS as well, if AIDS even exists, but at least for the AIDS symptoms. And then it works, there are other products as well that work for other items, other illnesses. There's ionic silver, or what's usually known as colloidal silver, for viruses and cancer, selenium for AIDS and also for cancer, very anti-carcinogenic. If you take the risk of contracting HIV in men who were in one particular study was cut in half if they were taking 200 micrograms of selenium a day. So it's very protective against flu virus, against a lot of different viruses. And then, of course, what's really well known these days, but wasn't in the past years, is natural vitamin D for protecting you from flu, for protecting you from cancer. The risk of contracting breast cancer in women is reduced by 25% if they're taking at least 2,000 international units of natural D, not the synthetic, but the natural D, every day. It's also very, very antiviral. In fact, once I did get the flu last year. I wasn't taking enough D, and I sort of hovered on the edge for 5 days and then finally fell sick. This was about a year ago this month. And then I took one of those cabinets with the glass on it, break open, only use in emergency type of bottles of vitamin D, 50,000 units, and I took one of those capsules at 10:30 in the morning. By 1:30, I was completely well, just from that one capsule of natural vitamin D. Magnesium omega-3s for depression, you want to take those. That's extremely important, magnesium for the heart. And resveratrol for longevity and also for its antiviral effects, and quite honestly also for losing weight. But you have to be real careful because resveratrol is very perishable, so you have to take the right form or the right brand. But what we have are these alternative therapies being suppressed. We're all aware of that. This is something that that's written into the law. For cancer, it's either cut, poison, or burn. That is surgery, radiation, or chemotherapy. That's it. That's all that's legally allowed in the state of California. The National Health Federation, some other organizations as well, have attempted to introduce legislation to allow alternative therapies. But the problem is that the medical monopoly is so well entrenched that that it does not survive very long in the state legislature. However, Laetrile was approved in about 30 states throughout the country, including Nevada, and we have so what we have is we have a medical monopoly that uses the government's coercive powers to enforce their monopoly, because as we all know, there's no true monopoly in a free market system. In a true free market system, what you have instead is these businesses that are facing competition running to the government, crying out for protection, and usually they say it's for the consumer, and in fact it's really to protect their profits. And what they do is they will actually capture these government agencies like the FDA, but it also applies to any other government agency. You know that when there existed the Civil Aeronautics Board, the airline industry captured that because they have this revolving door policy with them where you work for the Civil Aeronautics Board or the FDA or the FTC or the Interstate Commerce Commission or the Interstate Trucking Commission, whatever you're working for. And then you have a good cushy job after you leave that and with the private industry. So they bend over backwards to do the bidding of the private industry. This is a principle that's long been known and was promoted mostly by Ayn Rand, who publicized this fact many, many decades ago and said these are captured agencies. They get captured. They are not working for the good of the public. They're working for the good of the industry that they're intended to regulate. And these are what I refer to later in this speech too as the captured agencies. So truth number one, government agencies, I don't care which one it is, will never work for you. They don't work for you. They work for the businesses they're intended to regulate. And they work for those commercial and financial interests. And it's this sort of unholy marriage of business and government that we would call fascism. They are a tool for eliminating competition, and they can only be motivated to act on behalf of the true consumer when you make a concerted effort, intense and concerted effort, citizen effort, to make them take action in a particular direction. Then and only then will they act in the public good. So what we have on an international scale, though, is an organization called Codex Alimentarius. Now, how many people here already know what Codex is, Codex Alimentarius? Oh, it's a tough crowd. You already know. Okay, so I can finish this and go home now. But what in the drug company side of things, what they found is instead of going to all the different countries and capturing the agencies there, they found that they could go to a central entity, Codex Alimentarius, and capture it. It's the ultimate prize. So what we have is an international body that was created in the time frame of 1961 to 63 by two parent organizations, the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Health Organization. So they created this entity called the Codex Alimentarius Commission, and its goal, its purpose really, was twofold. It was to eliminate international barriers to trade, and it is also intended to protect the consumer by creating various standards and guidelines that govern many different types of food. We are tied into Codex through executory treaties that we've signed, and it's written into American law. CAFTA, for example, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, has specific wording in it that ties us into the Codex language and Codex guidelines. And the Codex process is one that involves some 27 committees. So you have the commission that meets every year in July, last week of June, early July, and because it has two parent organizations, the FAO and the WHO, it meets in alternate years, one one in Rome at the FAO headquarters, and then the next year in Geneva at the WHO headquarters. And I've gone to the FAO version of the meeting. We had someone else in the organization who was going to the Geneva meetings, but I would go to the Rome meetings each and every alternate year to attend these meetings. So just to give you a concept and a feel for what it's like, you have a table at the front, and you have the chairman or chairwoman who's there. The current person is a chairwoman, an American, who used to work for the FDA and now works for Codex. And around her is the staff from FAO, WHO, and from the Codex office itself. So there will be about 7, maybe even 10 people up there. And then in the audience, there will be a number of tables and chairs, obviously, with the country delegations. And keep in mind that Codex represents about 99% of the world's population now. We have that many members. So from Albania to Zimbabwe, alphabetically arranged, are the country member delegations. And who sits there? Is it someone like you or me? No, it's an FDA-type bureaucrat. Someone who has the least amount of interest in health freedom, but the most amount of interest in passing rules and regulations to bind us down. And then behind them are other types of attendees. That's the international non-governmental organizations, the INGOs. And that's what the National Health Federation is. You get accredited, and then you can sit there and you can listen and you can speak out. You can submit documents just like the country delegates do. And you can interact in real time with the delegates. If something's going on and I want to talk to the delegate from South Africa, I can get up, excuse me, I can get up and go over there and talk with her. So that's something of value, but most of the INGOs are just trade organizations like the World Sugar Research Organization, or the International Dairy Federation, or the Council for Responsible Nutrition. They all represent commercial interests. Only about 10, maybe 15% at most are consumer organizations such as ours. And we had a hard time getting in. In fact, the first few Codex meetings I went to about 10 years ago, I was on the US delegation, and that was like being a bump on a log. You can't say anything. You're forbidden from even lobbying the other country delegates. You just go there and look pretty or something, and you sit there, and you're supposed to be able to give free advice to the US delegate who's an FDA designee. But the actuality is it's really a waste of time except to learn how the process works. So I did that for 2 years, but I was such an annoying factor and thorn in the US delegate's side that she kicked me off the 3rd year, and I went through this process of getting the NHF accredited. So I really owed her a big favor, because otherwise I'd still be just a bump on a log with the US delegation. And instead, now I have the right to sit there and speak out at these meetings the same as she does. Interestingly enough, the very first meeting I went to, in fact, probably the 4th day of that meeting, she had, in the report, there was a paragraph that said the U.S. government supports, the delegation of the United States supports the right of the consumers to consume whatever vitamin mineral supplements they wish. I thought that was great language, but she asked the chairman to remove it. So I was fortuitously seated behind her, so I quickly wrote a note and said, the NHF does not agree with this, put it back in. Passed it to her, and she kind of looked at it and almost crumpled it up and sent it back. But fortunately, again, 5 minutes later, there was a break in the meeting, so I went outside the hall, into the hall, and waited for her to ambush her. So she came out, and I started talking to her. I said, you know, this is going to be really bad for the FDA, because we're going to publicize this all over, what you've done, and you're going to look really horrible. You need to put this back in. So she was arguing with me a little bit on that. And then came the industry representative, and I thought he was going to side with me. He was with the Council for Responsible Nutrition, which is a vitamin industry trade organization. And instead he came up, he said, oh, Scott, it's not important. We don't need that in there. So he's a real tall guy, and I was pointing at him about his stomach. I said, you know, your member organizations, your member companies are not going to appreciate your saying that. you really need to be backing me here. So he just, backed away and shut up. But then the break ended, went back into the meeting, and lo and behold, like 2 minutes into the meeting, the American delegate raised her little flag that says U.S., on it, was recognized by the chairman. She said, "Oh, Mr. Chairman, I made a mistake. I had intended that paragraph that was deleted to be moved to position number 37 or something like that instead of paragraph 17. Could you please move it there?" He goes, "Okay." And so it went back in. So that was my first small victory there. And it was, thank you. And it was, thank you, but it was very typical for the way these things operate at these meetings, because if you aren't persistently vocal at these meetings, then they'll just run right over you, and that's what happens. So you have some 27 different committees, and at these committees, they represent all different sort of specialized interests. Like there's a Fish and Fisheries Committee, there's a Natural Mineral Waters Committee, there's a Committee on Nutrition and Foods for Special Dietary Uses. That's the one that we were most interested in. There's a committee on, Codex Committee on Food Labeling. There's a Codex Committee on General Principles. I could go through almost the whole list. But the important ones are the Codex Committee on Food Labeling, because it deals with the GMO food labeling issue, and the CCNFSDU, which is a mouthful as an acronym, which is the Codex Committee on Nutrition that deals with the vitamin mineral guidelines. And that's the one where I had the first little run-in with the American delegate. And that's the one that's represented by the German government, by the way, as the German host, and they are very anti-supplement. So that has been the hugest battles that I've had, really knockdown, drag-out battles with the German chairman and with the European Union representative there. So underneath these committees, they have working groups because they can't do all the work. And so you have the Codex Alimentarius Commission as the grandparents, and then the committees as the parents, and the working groups as the grandchildren. And they're all working to create these standards and guidelines. And one of the guidelines that we're most interested in, which you've heard about, or should have heard about, is the vitamin mineral food supplement guideline. This is the one where they're trying to suppress the potencies in what can be sold as vitamins. And this is an ongoing process. So if you ever hear someone saying, "Oh, Codex will take effect this year or next year, December 31, 2009, that's just flat out wrong. What they did is in the year 2004, the South African delegate and I fought tooth and nail to prevent the guidelines from being implemented, or at least being adopted, excuse me, I shouldn't have said implemented, but adopted, and we lost, and then it went up from the committee level to the Codex Commission level for final approval, and I was the only one in a room with 300 people, like I described, to stand up and speak out against the adoption of it. Even the trade industry, CRN, they wanted it, and the IADSA people wanted it, the International Alliance of Dietary Food Supplement Associations. But the fact of the matter was it should never have been adopted. But all it was a framework. Now they're in the process of filling in the blank spaces. This is, by the way, a photo of the FAO building in Rome where the Codex Commission meeting was. I took this last summer, but this is where they do all the dirty work, at least at the commission level. And this is a photo I took in the year 2005, or 2007 actually, when the commission was considering some other aspects of the vitamin mineral guidelines, just so you get a feel for some of these people. Of course, the chairman, it was a chairman at that time, and the staff are up here. Right here, he's no longer the chairman of the Nutrition Committee, but he was, Rolf Grossklaus, and that's him. All the chairmen and chairwomen of the various committees have to attend the commission meetings. And then these are all the country delegations. And then an interesting kind of occult thing is on the ceiling, which I wish I had a better picture for you. But it's kind of this science fiction-y spaceships and whirling planets sort of mural that's hanging over their heads. And I don't know what the meaning of that would be. Maybe someone in the audience has a better idea than I do. But this gives you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like at the meeting. But this actually is not even all that typical. So the Codex attendees I actually already described a bit, so I don't really need to go too much more into that, except that I did forget to tell you the general public can attend as well, but they cannot speak out. They can just sit in the nosebleed section of the meeting rooms and watch what's going on. And then there's sometimes the press there, but usually it's the alternative press, not the real press. So what I was saying before is that actually Codex is a noble concept because it's based on the principles of eliminating international barriers to trade. Who could be against that? Sounds like free trade to me. And also, it is for consumer protection. But it's actually an elitist, top-down driven mechanism, very pro-drug, especially from the WHO side of things, not as much from the FAO end, but the WHO. And it's very anti-free market. And the worst thing about it is, you know, they're in the process of establishing through an 8-step process from step 1 to step 8, which is the final adoption, all these guidelines, and there are hundreds of them that have been adopted, and there are hundreds that are still to be adopted, maybe even 1,000. But the fact of the matter is it's such a slow process, it's so creakingly slow that it doesn't matter, because by the time they're adopted, they're like out of date already. For instance, there was, at the Codex Committee on Food Labeling, there was a Canadian delegate who had wanted to use the latest scientific information. But these people are so attached to the FAO expert guidance committees, the guidance panels, that what they do is they want to just use that data. But that data started being corrupted about 10 years ago because in the past, long story made short, but the FAO expert panels that constitute the scientific basis for creating these guidelines, they would select a panel attendees with various opinions. But in the year about 1999, they decided, well, you know, this is not great. We know what's good for everyone. Let's just handpick, cherry-pick those people who will support our predetermined outcome for the panel. So that's what they started doing 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. So what you get is garbage in, garbage out. You get corrupted data coming out of that. Yet the Codex attendees, all these bureaucrats, and there's no voting that goes on at these meetings. It's all by consensus. The chairman or the chairwoman sits up there. They see who's argued in the audience, and then they decide, oh, there's consensus. We can move it from step 1 to step 2, or step 4 to step 5. And that's what they do. There's no voting. And these delegates go, well, because we have the FAO guidance from 2004, let's use that. But as this Canadian delegate pointed out, hey, I have data from 2008. Let's use that. It's more current, it's more recent, it's more up to date. But she was almost hooted down, except for me. I supported her position, but everyone wants to go by this corrupt data. So if you do that, you aren't going to get very solid or reliable guidelines coming out of the Codex meetings, and it's going to be old data. They've already shown that by their actions. I'm afraid to hit it again. It didn't move. Thank you. So what we've found and what we've argued is at these meetings, and I've argued at the meetings themselves, that it's all based upon junk science. You don't have, they use these fancy terms, risk assessment, risk management, risk analysis, those kind of terms to justify what they're doing. But what they're really doing is, at least in the case of vitamin mineral food supplements, and some of the other things, is they're applying a toxicological model, because a lot of these bureaucrats are very drug-oriented. So they're used to dealing with drugs, which are dangerous, as you've seen, killing 1 million or 2 million Americans a day, a year. And so they think that supplements are dangerous too. And a toxicological model is applied to supplements. And that's why they're trying to put a maximum upper permitted limits on dietary supplements, on vitamin, mineral food supplements. So they're creating these various guidelines, and the blank spaces still need to be filled in for the maximum upper permitted limits for vitamin C, for vitamin D, all the normal vitamins, and they're working on that. Now, the German Risk Assessment Institute is the closest to achieving success in establishing the upper safe levels. But just to give you an idea of where they're headed and what they are trying to do, let me just read to you from this. And they want to make a maximum upper permitted limit for vitamin C of 225 milligrams. Vitamin B3, niacin, which they find to be very dangerous, by the way, because it causes flushing, they want to put a cap of 17 milligrams on it. Now, right now, today, you could go out to a health food store and buy a 500 milligram capsule. Excuse me. What are some of the others? Those are some of the most egregious ones. Oh, thank you very much. Vitamin B1, 1.3 milligrams. Vitamin E, 15 milligrams. We're used to thinking of it in international units, but this is a very low amount. And vitamin B12, 9 micrograms, because it's very dangerous. That sort of thing. So you can see the nonsense that's being pushed here, and they all think this is perfectly normal. They don't see anything wrong with it, and we're one of the few people to speak out, the National Health Federation, against this sort of thing that's been going on. So the other sort of guidelines are on the GM food labeling, and there's a big battle in Canada, which is the host country for that committee, on whether or not to label foods as GM or not. And the U.S. delegate told me to my face, saying that the typical consumer is too ignorant to understand the true significance of GM food labeling and GM food, so we shouldn't have it. So what you find are the Canadian delegates, the American delegate, the Mexican delegates, the Argentinian delegates, pretty much the Western Hemisphere, which constitutes the grain exporting countries that have all this GM food, in favor or opposed to GM food labeling. And then the Europeans, the third world countries, they want it because their consumers want it. So this will be the big fight at the next committee meeting in Canada in the first week of May. And then at the other committee meetings, the Codex Committee on Food Additives, we were the only ones to speak out against aspartame and aluminum food additives there at that meeting. No support from anyone except on the aluminum, and that was from the Chinese chairman himself, surprisingly enough. Then on melamine, that's another issue. I'll have that meeting in Turkey at the end of April, and this is the contaminant, for those of you who don't know, that poison the food of cat and dog food in Canada and the US, because it's a very cheap additive that the Chinese manufacturers were adding in to artificially boost the protein content when it was tested in laboratories of the pet food. So you do a test, and instead of having to pay expensive prices for the ingredient of a protein ingredient, they'd add melamine, but it was killing the animals. I mean, you know, large numbers of cats and dogs were dying from eating this dried dog and cat food. And then it also made its way into infant baby formulas that were manufactured for the U.S., but it didn't kill many babies. I guess they were hardier than the cats and dogs, but still, it was a huge problem. Well, at the last year's meeting in Rotterdam that I went to for this particular committee, they wanted to have safe, acceptable limits for melamine to be added to food. And I said, this is crazy. I couldn't believe it. I was the only one to speak up against it, but they wanted to put it in. It's not like arsenic or lead or even fluoride that are naturally occurring in foods and waters. Those are naturally occurring elements, so you do have to have some minimal acceptable limit because you can't eliminate all of it. This is something that's artificially added in, and it's not something you find in nature typically, and yet they wanted to have an acceptable limit. So this will be another that we'll be fighting in about a month's time. So this is a cartoon. I had this libertarian cartoonist named Russ Moe draw, but it shows sort of the mentality of a lot of the big vitamin and mineral supplement companies, where they're kind of accepting of the guidelines, the Codex guidelines. They're actually some of our biggest enemies at these meetings. Not really the drug companies, although increasingly the vitamin companies are being bought up by the drug companies. So Pfizer, for instance, has bought into several drug companies, or vitamin companies. But what they're doing is they say, oh, because these are science-based standards, of course the science is garbage, but because these are science-based standards, we're going to accept them. And what some of these drug companies are planning on doing is buying into the industry, taking over, and they've started doing this, taking over the trade organizations and pushing their agenda, which is to sell worldwide sort of Fred Flintstone type vitamins that won't cure you, won't heal you, won't do much for you, but they can sell them by the millions and they'll be profitable, but they won't be competition for their own drug products that are very profitable. So that's what we're seeing not only at the domestic level, but at the international, the global level, the Codex level. This is a picture of where the last meeting place was for the Codex Nutrition Committee in Germany. It was in Dusseldorf, Germany, and I went to this meeting the first week of November. And it was held in this kind of small room. This was actually my seat way at the back of the hall. But I actually spoke out during this meeting more than all the other INGOs combined, so they were so sick of hearing of me. But up on the screen is actually the picture of the American delegate at the meeting speaking. That's how they do it. They'll have they'll have the text displayed on the screen, and then the person who's speaking there, so for the ease of the others to be noticed. So this was a particularly, I'm not sure what the next slide is, but yeah, this is a particularly important meeting because again, they're still developing the guidelines on the maximum upper limits. But while I was at this meeting, there was a document. You know, there are always all these documents that are submitted with comments on them, and we submit a lot of comments ourselves. But the working group had, and this is the actual document that I got at the time, that has the horrible title of Proposed Draft Annex to the Codex Guidelines on Nutrition Labeling, General Principles for Establishing Nutrient Reference Values of Vitamin Minerals for Labeling Purposes for the General Population. Boy, if that won't put you to sleep, I don't know what will. But this was actually an extremely important document, and I didn't realize it until it was almost too late, because this is setting the NRVs that will go on supplement bottles throughout the world at some point, not immediately, but at some point. So what are nutrient reference values? Well, you know, when you look at a vitamin bottle, you'll see the RDA or RDI, right? You're used to seeing that, the recommended dietary allowance, recommended daily intake. And it'll say 100%, 75%, or whatever, and it'll also give the figure for the milligram content, the weight content of the nutrient. So some of us are informed. We know that 60 milligrams of vitamin C is nothing, and we need to take 8,000% of that. But for the average consumer, it's different. For the average consumer, they look on the label, they see 60 milligrams, and then to the right of it, they see RDI 100%. They go, great, I'm getting 100% of my vitamin C. I don't need to worry about the rest of it. And then they puff on a cigarette that each cigarette will destroy 60 milligrams of vitamin C. But it's very misleading, and for most of the population, it's exceedingly important to have those NRVs be as high as possible, so that when the typical consumer reads it and sees 50% or 100%, they get a true picture of what their dietary intake is for that nutrient. So what did these morons do? Well, these morons who were putting this together, the Republic of Korea, the Americans, and the others, and again, I don't expect you to read this, so I'll kind of read it for you. But in all this mess, and I read this during a break, they were putting the levels. They had it for vitamin C, 60 milligrams. Where is vitamin C? There it is. 60 milligrams, but they wanted to reduce it down to 45 because 60 was too much. They wanted to reduce niacin from an obscenely high 18 milligrams to 15. So that would become the new 100% of your RDI, your NRV. Magnesium, which most people really need a lot of, down here, they wanted to reduce from 300 milligrams down to 240. So they're cutting everything down except, interestingly enough, although I don't have a copy on the screen, fluoride, which they want to keep very high. So when I saw this at this last meeting in November, I went really ballistic, and of course, they let the country delegates speak first, then the INGOs can speak. So the first country to speak out was Costa Rica, and they said, well, we think lowering the level on vitamin A from 800 micrograms down to 550 is not that good. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that was it. Then it was my turn. It was going to sail through this document. No one else wanted to talk about it. The working group had dealt with it. They had written it. So, hey, it had to be good. So I took the floor. I said, this is going to be a public relations nightmare for Codex. It's going to make us the laughing stock of the world. And I started harping, these figures need to be raised, not lowered. And we're headed in the wrong direction. So I went through a whole bunch of arguments. And then the Australian delegate took the floor after me and said, oh, that's nonsense. Well, you know, this is just an extra degree of comfort that we need. Her idea of having more restrictions was it's just an extra degree of comfort. So then I took the floor again. I argued against that. This back and forth with pretty much me against the world went on for about 30, 45 minutes. The only ones to support me were, believe it or not, the Iraqi delegate said a quick word in my favor. And there was another delegate too. Well, the Costa Rican had already spoken out. So I was going on back and forth, but I could see the chairman was a little bit nervous because he was always so concerned about the public image of Codex, of his committee. And so I was working on his mind. So at one point he said, well, maybe we should hold this document back. I don't see any consensus here. And I said, I leaped on that like a shot, and I said, oh, Mr. Chairman, that is so smart. You are right. We should hold this document back. And then some others, like the Australians, said, oh, I don't know. We need to go forward and keep on adopting it. But then, bless their hearts, the Indian delegate spoke up, and he said, we agree with the comments of the National Health Federation, and we think this document must be held back. And that was enough for the chairman. He goes, boom, we're holding it back. It's not going forward. And we had a victory right there. So that was wonderful. Yeah. So we'll be fighting this again in November at the next committee meeting because it's just been held back. But we're marshaling our forces with the Indians and even, believe it or not, the Chinese who are in our favor but didn't speak out, and others. And we hope to defeat it and get the figures all moved up. So this is very typical for what's going on there. And it's something you all need to be aware of. So these documents can look very insignificant or very highly technical, but they can have very extensive effects elsewhere. So that's part of what they do as well. They put out various documents like this for the general public, and this is just to give you a sampling. But this is the one that might concern most of you more than even the others. And this is Codex's strategic plan, because you'll keep hearing from people, oh, don't worry about Codex. Well, people who think they know. Don't worry about Codex. It's not going to affect us domestically. It will not take away our vitamins domestically. You even hear that within the supplement industry. So this is that same document that you see on the screen. And if you turn the page inside and you look at the strategic vision statement, And this is all very professionally done. And again, I don't expect you to read what's on the screen, but I'll read you the pertinent part. It talks about how the Codex Alimentarius Commission envisions a particular world and worldview. But to this end, the Commission will develop internationally agreed standards and related texts for use in domestic regulation and international trade in food that are based on scientific principles. So right there in their own words, they're telling you they want to apply it domestically to all the member organizations or member states. And we could even turn the page and there's more language, there's more wording that indicates that it's to promote national regulatory systems and application at international and national levels. So it is fully intended to be applied domestically, and it will gut our protections under the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and that's why we're there fighting it, certainly in this this committee and at other committees as well. Next one, if we could. Thank you. So one of the machines driving this is the European Union, because they have a very big voice at this meeting, because they're fond of telling the chairman or the chairwoman, depending on the committee meeting, that they represent X number of countries, usually about 15, because not all the EU states are members of Codex. But what's happened is they've done their own guidelines, their own vitamin mineral guidelines, called the European Union's Food Supplements Directive, which started taking effect July 31, 2005, and was to be fully implemented the end of last year, or really the first day of this year. And this has been removing vitamin supplements of higher potency and even certain types of supplements from the marketplace in the more liberal countries within the European Union. That's Ireland, Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Sweden. Not France and Germany. It's brought their standards up a little bit, liberalized them a bit, but for the far more liberal countries, and I use that in the classical liberal sense of the word, like Great Britain, it started removing those products from the marketplace. So what we have, gotta have water. So what we have is the European Union pushing at the Codex level to have the Codex guidelines match their European Union Food Supplements Directive. But in the minds of some people, they're confusing the implementation, December 31, 2009, of the European Union Food Supplements Directive with Codex. So you'll be well-educated, far above most other people, by letting them know, no, you're wrong, it's not the Codex that took effect December 31, it was the European Union Food FSA, or FSD, that took effect. But nevertheless, it's important to refer to the FSD because it's a lot of the basis for the rules and regulations that are being put into effect at the Codex level as well. And again, it's meant to eliminate the competition. It's meant to eliminate those natural remedies that will heal and be competition for the drugs that are sold through the various pharmaceutical industries, especially in France and Germany. So here we come to the domestic legislation, and you all should know about, and if you don't, you should be ashamed of yourselves, to know that the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act that was passed in 1994 with the broad support of a lot of citizens, health freedom organizations, including our own National Health Federation, and even the trade industry, has really done a lot to take away the arbitrary powers of the FDA. Not all the powers, because the lie is that now the supplement industry is unregulated. That's a flat-out lie. It's very regulated. It's just not regulated in as arbitrary a way as it had been pre-1994. So this has been the mainstay and has become a sort of a third rail of politics, the way that Social Security is in the U.S., amongst a lot of voters. But nevertheless, they're chipping away at it with various little acts that they've done and bills that they've done. So what I've put up here are the good ones, DeShay, and then Ron Paul's bills, House Resolution 3394, 3395, 3396, 778, and 2629, which various ones are Freedom of Speech Act, the Health Freedom Act, the Congressional Responsibility and Accountability Act, the allowing the interstate sale of raw milk, that's H.R. 778, which should be very popular amongst you Weston Price people. And then 2629 is the Coercion is Not Healthcare Act that allows people the freedom to choose whether they want to go into the government plan or not, or be forced to buy insurance or not. So it covers a wide range of things. But on the bad side of the scales, we have the current one that was introduced by Senator McCain, Senate Bill 3002, on February 4th. And this is an attempt domestically to implement the European Union Food Supplements Directive, because in the European Union, under that directive, if you are not on what's known as a positive list, that is, if you are not approved to be offered for sale, then you cannot sell that product. It's the complete opposite. It's the Napoleonic Code law versus common law. You know, under the common law, there's anything that's not specifically prohibited is allowed. That's the common law. That's Anglo-Saxon law. That's what we have in the U.S., or should have in the U.S. In the European, continental European system, the Napoleonic Code, it's the exact opposite. Anything that's not specifically permitted is forbidden. So that makes a wide range of restrictions, very easy to restrict your activities, but that's the continental European mentality, and that's the concept, the general principles that are behind having this positive list of supplements that can be sold. And so that is, in essence, what McCain was trying to do, was implement that kind of a list in the U.S. And that's why there was such an outcry, so that from February 4th, when he introduced the bill, to February 22nd, when he had been so inundated with emails and letters and phone calls from irate citizens, that he felt compelled to issue a Senate floor statement, actually misrepresenting his bill, to March 4th, when he finally withdrew his support from the bill. That's the kind of firestorm that he generated because of that activity. But nevertheless, it's important to remember that bill is not dead. Just because McCain withdrew support, it still could go forward. There's still Dorgan behind it, there's still some other people behind it, and it's still a danger. But it's something you need to be aware of and to act against. You can go to our website, which is article the, T-H-E, and then our initials, nhf.com. Click on the Government Affairs button, and then go and click on the Federal button, and you'll see a chart. And I have to remember maybe for the next presentation to have a sample of that chart up there. And you'll see the bad bills that we oppose and the good bills that we support. And there is action that you can take, sample letters, a petition you can sign. You can read the actual bill if you want to read it for yourself, and the like. But I encourage you to go to that website, and it'll be shown on the screen later so that you can take action. Now, the other thing that's so bad is this H.R. 2749, which is really almost a total takeover of the American economy, at least food economy. And it was passed by the House, and it's sitting in the Senate right now, unacted on, but it could easily be acted upon, be brought to the floor for a vote, for a discussion and then a vote. So it's something you need to keep your eyes and ears open on and to be active against should it become active itself. So here's the McCain bill, by the way, and there's our lovely Arizona senator. So it would require this comprehensive registration of all manufacturers, distributors, and holders of supplements. What that means is if you're a multi-level marketer and you're keeping some of your product in your home, you have to register with the FDA as a supplement facility, dietary supplement facility. And you have to give the list of products that you have. And at some point you have to pay a fee. Then the prohibition of sale of any dietary supplement not on the FDA-approved positive list. One person, the Secretary for the Department of Health Services, has the power to say what's on or off that list. And then burdensome reporting of every adverse event, whether it's trivial or serious, whether you cut your finger on the bottle cap or you just didn't like the smell of the product. That has to be reported by every dietary supplement facility, which also means the multi-level marketers have to fill in those reports as well and submit them. That's the kind of dangerous thing that this guy has proposed just in a bid to get reelected. So, boy, we're almost out of time. I better, maybe I should hit the fast forward like I did before. Let's see. So then we have Obama disease care reform. You know, this sort of, if we build it, they will come mentality is what's present in Congress these days. And the taxes, interestingly enough on this, and I'll not have much time because I wasn't paying attention to the signs, but an interesting thing about this bill that shows it's really not about health benefits at all is the fact that the taxes and the penalties kick in immediately and go forward, and the benefits don't kick in for 3 years. What do you think this really means? Well, the healthcare economy is a real cash cow. There's a lot of money. It's a significant part of the American economy, and the politicians are desperate for money. They're broke. The U.S. is broke. It can't afford the benefits for this, but it can sure afford to gather the money for 3 years. So this is just the politicians' attempt to gain tax money for 3 years to save their rear ends, and then they'll be out of office, or it'll be election time will be over, and then the benefits, then you have to pay the piper. So it's really a save the politicians bill. It's not a health benefits bill. Death counsels, ration care, no medical privacy. There's even a provision in there because if you don't pay the penalties because you haven't gotten the insurance, the IRS can go in and grab money out of your account. They can levy on your account. So no real choice, and we really just can't afford this. So it's a monstrosity, it really is. It's an aberration, and it'll harm the economy. It will kill the economy and raise premiums, and people will not be happy with it, even though they think they will. The real reform can be found in Ron Paul's bills, which I've already touched on a bit, so I won't spend time on that, especially since I don't have time.